Why would the Pope, yes, the Pope, step onto the world stage and speak in cryptic warnings about a woman who, until a few years ago, was simply known as the actress from Suits? Why would the highest spiritual authority in Catholicism hint that Meghan Markle is harboring a secret so dangerous, so globally impactful, that it could change how the entire world views her? And why now? This isn't a conspiracy theory cooked up in some internet rabbit hole. This came straight from the Vatican. Delivered in a sermon watched by millions, dissected by theologians, and whispered about in royal hallways, Hollywood boardrooms, and security circles from London to Los Angeles. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The words weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be, because buried in the sermon's poetic rhythm was a veiled warning, a signal, maybe even a plea. And those who know how to read between the lines, they heard something very specific. That Meghan Markle's most carefully guarded secret, the one thing she thought would never, ever surface, is about to be exposed. And when it is, it won't just shake her reputation. It could unravel alliances, question bloodlines, and ignite a battle between global influence and spiritual legacy. Sound dramatic? It is, because this isn't just about fame, or royalty, or even religion. This is about power. And the war that erupts when ancient institutions, like the British monarchy and the Roman Catholic Church, find themselves at odds over one woman. So let's go back to the moment this firestorm began. The moment Pope Leo XIV, beloved by millions, feared by governments, and known for his strict commitment to preserving tradition, stood before the congregation in St. Peter's Basilica and uttered a phrase that still haunts analysts, Vatican insiders, and media watchdogs. Beware the crownless queen, for her light blinds those unready for truth. The crowd didn't gasp. Not at first. Most were too mesmerized by the ritual, the language, the incense, the majesty of the moment. But those words, they hit the internet like a tidal wave. Bloggers, TikTokers, and journalists leapt into action. Who was this crownless queen? Was it symbolic? Was it political? Or was it deeply personal? And then, almost simultaneously, 5 key clues were noticed. The Pope paused right before the line. He broke script, deviating from the Vatican-approved sermon text distributed just hours earlier. His tone shifted. It wasn't pastoral. It was ominous. He made eye contact with someone in the front row, an American diplomat known for ties to the entertainment industry. And perhaps most chillingly, that portion of the live stream vanished from the Vatican's official YouTube archive less than 12 hours later. But the internet never forgets. Copies of the clips spread like wildfire. Subtitles, breakdowns, reaction videos. And before sunrise, one name was trending globally alongside the Pope's. Meghan Markle. Why? Because, as one Vatican scholar put it, there is no other public figure today who fits the phrase crownless queen more than Meghan. She wears no royal title. She holds no sovereign power. And yet her influence, her image, her voice, far exceed those of many actual monarchs. And that's just the beginning. Because the truth is, this isn't the first time Meghan's name has whispered its way through the marble corridors of the Vatican. No, long before her marriage to Prince Harry, before the Netflix deals, before the palace drama, the church was watching. And now they're speaking. But let's not jump too far ahead. Let's ground ourselves in a question you're probably asking right now. Why would the Vatican care about Meghan Markle? Isn't she just another celebrity? Or maybe, if you follow royal news, a controversial duchess who traded tiaras for Hollywood red carpets? But here's the thing most people don't realize. The Catholic Church isn't just a spiritual institution. It's a geopolitical superpower, a network of influence and information centuries old, with archives that stretch back to empires and tools of surveillance that would make MI6 blush. And when someone starts to shift the balance of soft power, through media, public sentiment, or global narrative control, the Vatican pays attention. Because stories shape souls. And Meghan? She's not just a public figure. She's a symbol, a myth in real time, a lightning rod for debates around race, royalty, gender, colonialism, and the media. To some, she's a feminist icon. To others, a cunning manipulator. To some, a victim of a centuries-old institution. To others, the very force trying to dismantle that institution from within. So when the Pope sends out a veiled warning, especially one tied to prophecy, spiritual warfare, and deceptive light, people notice. And not just fans and followers. Governments, clergy, royals. In fact, within 24 hours of the sermon, 3 seemingly unrelated events occurred. Buckingham Palace refused to comment on the Pope's remarks, breaking tradition of neutral silence on religious matters. Serena Williams, Meghan's longtime confidant, posted a cryptic black square with a single word. Covenant. A former Vatican archivist contacted an Italian tabloid claiming he had read the Markle file years ago and that parts of it had been sealed under papal order. Suddenly, this wasn't a sermon. It was a signal. A countdown had begun, and every hour that passed, more pieces surfaced. A leaked letter from Prince William to a Vatican liaison. A suppressed segment from Meghan's 2021 Oprah interview. Rumors of a Swiss vault containing documents with her name. And a forgotten priest who once heard her confession in Los Angeles. But none of this would matter. None of it would have global impact if it weren't for one terrifying truth. The Vatican doesn't warn lightly, and when it does, it's almost always a prelude to exposure. So what is Meghan hiding? What is so controversial, so buried, that even the church fears its reveal? Is it something from her past? Her bloodline? A pact she made to gain power? Or worse? Was she never supposed to be in the public eye to begin with? There's a theory, and we'll get into this in the next chapter, that Meghan's rise was no accident. That it was part of a long-brewing influence operation connecting Hollywood, royalty, and spiritual symbolism. Wild? Maybe. But remember, stranger truths have come from this very city, the Vatican, where secrets are protected by divine oath and lies are buried under gold and marble. So buckle in, because this story is bigger than Meghan. It's about how myth becomes reality, how power shifts in silence, and how even the most beloved figures can carry terrifying secrets. But before we reveal the contents of that suppressed Vatican file, and before we expose the message behind the Pope's warning, there's one person who tried to bury this story before it spread. Not a journalist, not a royal aide, not even a cardinal. No, it was someone Meghan once called sister. Someone whose silence, in the wake of the Pope's message, was louder than any press release. And when she stopped speaking, insiders panicked. Because they knew she was in too deep, and she knew too much. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when silence becomes the loudest alarm? When a woman known for commanding the global spotlight suddenly goes dark, just hours after the Pope implies she may be carrying the most dangerous secret of the decade. The world took notice. Because the moment Serena Williams, Meghan Markle's closest friend, public defender, and lifelong cheerleader, posted that blank black square with the cryptic word covenant, a chill swept through royal watchers, spiritual circles, and conspiracy forums alike. It wasn't just the absence of words. It was the timing, the precision, the eerie synchronicity. Was it a coincidence that she posted it just 6 hours after Pope Leo XIV made his now infamous reference to the crownless queen? Or was it a warning? Let's rewind. Just a little. It was Sunday. St. Peter's Basilica was packed. Cameras were rolling. Millions tuned in for the Pope's anticipated message on spiritual discernment in an age of deception. Standard Vatican fare, right? Wrong. Because partway through his address, Pope Leo did something unusual. He paused. He looked down. Not at his notes, but at the floor. Then he raised his head and spoke slowly, deliberately. "Beware," he said, "the crownless queen. Her light deceives. Her voice misleads. And when her veil is lifted, nations will tremble." No names. No direct accusation. But the effect? Immediate. In London, palace aides reportedly froze mid-meeting. In Los Angeles, Archwell's crisis team was summoned to a Code Amber emergency Zoom. In Rome, several bishops reportedly exchanged knowing glances and looked visibly unsettled. But perhaps the most curious reaction came from someone seated near the front pews. A U.S. diplomat known for her deep Hollywood ties reportedly leaned over to a Vatican aide and whispered, "It's her, isn't it?" And just like that, the firestorm was lit. Within the hour, Crownless Queen trended on X. By evening, news anchors were dissecting the sermon line by line like it was a Dan Brown novel. YouTubers uploaded breakdowns. TikTokers did dramatic readings. Reddit spun threads that went hundreds of comments deep in minutes. But amid all the noise came the eerie silence. Meghan? Nothing. No statement. No Instagram post. No Archewell announcement. Just silence. And then, just when things began to cool, Serena posted the square. Black. Blank. Captioned with one word, covenant. No context. No tags. No further elaboration. Just that. What did it mean? Let's talk about the word covenant. In religious terms, it's a sacred agreement, a pact, an unbreakable bond between God and humanity. But in conspiracy circles, it's something else entirely. A covenant can refer to a secret pact made for power, influence, or legacy, often with spiritual overtones, sometimes even darker ones. Could Serena have been referencing something spiritual? Or was it a warning? A signal? One thing is certain, it wasn't random. Because buried in Serena's public history is a detail most people missed. Back in 2018, she and Meghan were spotted attending a private retreat in Napa Valley, marketed as a sacred transformation summit, hosted by an elusive group called the Luminous Circle. Its description? An immersive weekend to realign feminine energy, destiny contracts, and ancestral power under lunar guidance. Sounds mystical, maybe a little woo-woo, but also suspiciously aligned with the very themes the Pope warned about: light, deception, influence. And here's the twist. One of the guest speakers at that retreat was a former Vatican nun turned spiritual intuitive, Sister Lucia Serrano. You'll hear her name again later, because she plays a far larger role in this story than anyone expected. But let's stay in the moment. The morning after the Pope's sermon and Serena's black square, rumors started to swirl that a Vatican cardinal had tried to halt the sermon minutes before broadcast, that Archewell's legal team contacted 3 news networks requesting clarification on religious messaging and defamation thresholds, that one of Meghan's former Suits co-stars allegedly received a cease and desist after jokingly posting, "All hail the crownless queen," on Instagram. Now, here's where things get stranger. A whistleblower from the Vatican's media department claimed the Pope wasn't supposed to say that line, that the approved sermon text distributed 48 hours prior made no mention of queens, crowns, or veils. He had deviated, deliberately, which raises the obvious question. Why? Did something happen in the days leading up to the sermon? Had the Pope received new information, a new warning? Or was it a long-held plan to plant the first public seed of a global revelation? Because the Pope didn't stop there. He followed up the crownless queen reference with a line even more cryptic. She was called to serve, but chose to reign. Her voice is sweet, but it sings in frequencies that fracture. And in her wake, division multiplies. Again, no names. But the tone? Accusatory, prophetic, even apocalyptic. Within hours, spiritual commentators across the globe weighed in. Some said it was a reference to false prophets. Others believed it referred to a coming schism within Western ideologies, one they blamed Meghan's brand for accelerating. But a small group of Vatican watchers had another theory, one far more controversial. They believed the Pope wasn't warning the world about Meghan. He was warning her that the Vatican knew that her secret, whatever it is nearing exposure, and that if she didn't come clean, the Church would. It's a terrifying thought, because it implies a level of surveillance, spiritual intelligence, and geopolitical leverage that most of us can't comprehend. And yet, there's precedent. The Vatican has, for centuries, tracked high-profile figures deemed influencers of morality, from emperors to artists, scientists to celebrities. And now, allegedly, Meghan Markle. You might be wondering, where's the evidence? What makes this anything more than speculative drama? Good question. And here's the answer. 3 years ago, a former Vatican archivist, Father Alberto Nazzi, went on the record in an Italian newspaper stating that a woman of American descent, tied to both royal blood and Hollywood, had her name flagged in Project Aurora. What's Project Aurora? We'll get to that. But for now, all you need to know is this. It's a Vatican-led initiative designed to monitor global figures whose personal narratives intersect with theological prophecy, social destabilization, or spiritual corruption. And Meghan, according to Nazzi, was one of only 7 names flagged in 2014, before her marriage, before the palace, before the world even noticed her. Let that sink in. And let this sink in, too. The Pope didn't just issue a sermon. He sent a ripple through the world's most powerful institutions. And those ripples are reaching shore. Because hours after the broadcast, a UN ambassador was reportedly asked to prepare for public integrity fallout related to celebrity influence campaigns. A confidential Vatican memo leaked days later suggested preliminary briefings to be prepared on the Markle file in case of further press escalation. And Meghan herself was spotted at a Los Angeles hotel not far from a known legal war room her team has used in the past during high-crisis situations. Whatever's coming, she knows. And she's bracing for it. Because this isn't just about rumors anymore. It's about reckoning. And if the Pope's words were meant as a final warning, then what follows next could be catastrophic. But before we dive into that Vatican file, and trust me, you'll want to hear what's in it, we need to follow the silence. Because while Meghan braced herself, someone else vanished from public view altogether. Someone who once gave sermons of his own. Someone who knew Meghan in her earliest Hollywood days. A man of faith turned ghost. And the moment he disappeared, the Vatican's interest in Meghan tripled. But what came next would unravel the church's best-kept secret, one hidden not in a chapel, but beneath it. What would make the most outspoken woman in sports, someone who's never shied away from controversy, go utterly, chillingly quiet? No press statement, no Instagram selfies, no sassy tweets, not even a cryptic motivational quote, just silence. In an age where silence speaks louder than noise, Serena Williams' sudden disappearance from public commentary raised more than a few eyebrows. And not just because she's Meghan Markle's best friend, but because her silence came at the exact moment the world needed her voice. And that's when the whispers began. What did Serena know? And more importantly, what was she told not to say? Let's set the scene. Serena and Meghan's friendship isn't a casual celebrity handshake on a red carpet. It's decades deep, built over time, mutual respect, and shared battles against elitism and media bias. Serena was there for Meghan before the tiaras and Netflix deals. She defended her during the Oprah fallout, celebrated her pregnancies, and even spoke out publicly when the British tabloids went for Meghan's throat. She was more than a friend. She was a shield. So when Serena disappeared from social media less than 24 hours after Pope Leo XIV delivered his crownless queen prophecy, people noticed. And then came the black square. At first glance, it seemed like a repost from a past campaign, a nod to the hashtag Blackout Tuesday movement. But this was different. There was no caption explaining it, no cause, no call to action, just one word, covenant. Not activism, not solidarity, not performance, but a warning, a veiled signal, or maybe a confession, because buried in Serena's history, beneath the championships, the brand deals, the press conferences, is a quieter chapter, one rarely explored, one deeply spiritual. Few know this, but Serena was raised a Jehovah's Witness, a religious group with strict boundaries on fame, competition, and secular influence. Serena herself has said in interviews that she struggled with the balance between faith and public life. Her mother, Oracene Price, was known to be deeply spiritual, and while Serena never officially disavowed her religious background, she did say she found her own rhythm with God. So when Serena posts the word covenant in the wake of a papal warning, it hits differently, especially to those familiar with biblical language. Because in the Old Testament, covenants aren't casual promises. They're binding agreements between God and chosen individuals, Noah, Abraham, Moses. They often involve sacrifice, destiny, protection, and warning. So ask yourself, was Serena declaring loyalty, breaking a bond, or signaling that a divine contract, spiritual or otherwise, was about to be tested? And if so, with whom? Because behind the scenes, sources say that Serena's inner circle went into lockdown mode immediately following the Pope's speech. 2 assistants were instructed to deactivate old email accounts. Her longtime brand agent postponed 3 upcoming interviews. And an unnamed source close to her team allegedly told a journalist off record, she's being told to stay quiet. This is bigger than tennis. It's bigger than Meghan. But here's where things get stranger. A paparazzi photo, never released to the public but leaked anonymously to a Swiss-based journalist, showed Serena arriving at a private estate in Bel Air just 2 nights after the sermon. She wasn't alone. By her side, a man identified as Father Alejandro Maris, a defrocked Catholic priest known for his controversial work in spiritual contract theory. Yes, that's a real term. Maris was quietly removed from Vatican diplomatic service in 2019 after reports surfaced that he had been conducting unofficial theological consultations with celebrities, CEOs, and politicians. His specialty? Helping high-profile individuals determine whether their life trajectory was in conflict with divine purpose or with ancient religious prophecies. Sound far-fetched? Sure, but dig a little deeper and it gets darker. Maris was once accused of leaking internal Vatican memos that linked certain Hollywood figures to something called the doctrine of dissonant light. Never heard of it. Most haven't. But allegedly, it's a term used by select Vatican theologians to describe individuals who emit immense social influence cloaked in moral ambiguity, thus steering cultures away from divine order. And Meghan's name? Rumored to be on the list. And now Serena? Seen consulting with the very man who categorized Meghan as a possible dissonant light vector. Why? Why would Serena, arguably the most disciplined, brand-savvy athlete alive, risk being seen with a man tied to secret Vatican doctrine? What were they discussing? What does she know? One theory is that Serena was trying to warn Meghan. Another says she was trying to distance herself, sever the covenant. But the most unsettling theory is that Serena's silence wasn't her choice. That something or someone forced her hand, because 48 hours later, another anomaly occurred. One of Serena's old foundations, the Serena Williams Initiative for Equality, was quietly removed from a partner NGO's website. No announcement, no redirect, just gone. When reporters reached out for comment, they were met with an eerie refrain. No comment. We're undergoing internal review. What's there to review? Unless something or someone is forcing an internal audit of Serena's affiliations. And here's the kicker. Remember that private retreat Meghan and Serena attended back in 2018? The Lumina Circle Summit? Guess who else was there? Archbishop Leonardo Covaldi. That's right. The same Vatican insider whose name appears years later on a suspicious donation to Meghan's Archwell Foundation. Back then, Covaldi had not yet been formally disciplined. He was praised in elite circles as a progressive mystic, but insiders say his interests were always shadowy. One staffer who helped organize that retreat described it this way. It wasn't just a wellness retreat. It was an initiation. Something was agreed to. I don't know what. But people left changed. And yet, the official press photos showed nothing out of the ordinary. Smiling women, vision boards, meditation gardens. But one attendee, who requested anonymity, told a very different story. There was a candlelit ceremony. Names were spoken. Serena and Meghan were the final pair to step forward. We were told it symbolized breaking generational chains. But I remember the phrase, binding light, being repeated. It gave me chills. And that phrase, binding light, guess where it reappears? In Pope Leo's sermon, just moments before he references the crownless queen. Coincidence? Not likely. Especially when you learn that the Vatican reportedly sent a request to the retreat organizers in 2020 asking for a transcript of all activities, rituals, and attendees. Their response? The organization disbanded within the year. So let's piece this together. The Pope issues a veiled warning. Serena, Meghan's closest ally, goes silent and posts a cryptic message. She's then seen meeting with a controversial former priest who once flagged Meghan as a spiritual disruptor. Their shared past includes a mysterious retreat led by a now-disgraced archbishop. And key philanthropic ties between Serena and Meghan begin to quietly dissolve. Are you seeing the pattern? Because if this were fiction, you'd be screaming cover up. But it's not fiction. It's unfolding in real time. And the players involved? Some of the most powerful, most protected figures in the world. And yet, there's still more. Because as Serena retreated from public view, whispers began to spread from inside Buckingham Palace. Whispers that the Pope's warning was not the first signal. That years earlier, the Vatican had opened a file on Meghan, not as a public figure, not even as a royal consort, but as a spiritual anomaly. A woman whose rise was predicted, whose voice carried prophetic resonance, and whose influence may have come at a cost. So what did the Vatican know? And more importantly, how long have they known? To answer that, we have to go deep inside the most secretive archive in the world. buried beneath centuries of religious history, sealed under papal authority, and hiding a file that just might explain everything. Because what's inside that folder isn't just information, it's revelation. And once it's opened, there's no going back. What if the Vatican has been watching Meghan Markle for over a decade? Not because of who she married, not because of what she said in that Oprah interview, but because of who she is and what they believe she represents. What if her rise to global fame didn't just alarm Buckingham Palace, Hollywood producers, or political analysts, but ancient theologians in Rome? What if, long before her face was plastered on magazine covers, before she stepped into Windsor Castle, before she even auditioned for Suits, her name was already on a list? A file, flagged, labeled, and sealed inside the most secretive institution on earth, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. You probably didn't even know such a file existed. Most people don't, but it does. And according to a former Vatican archivist who fled the church in 2021, that file holds details that not only stunned the clergy, but terrified them. So here's the question. What's in the Vatican's dossier on Meghan Markle? And why are they so afraid of it being made public? Let's start at the beginning. In 2013, a covert project was launched within the Vatican's Office for Prophetic Doctrine and Societal Influence, an obscure branch known mostly to internal theologians and geopolitical advisors. The initiative was called Project Aurora. Its objective? To track individuals whose global influence, through media, politics, or cultural symbolism, might align with ancient prophecies, eschatological warnings, or spiritual destabilization. Yes, it sounds dramatic. It is dramatic. But the Vatican takes prophecy seriously. Centuries of doctrine, mysticism, and scriptural interpretation have made them obsessive about signs, archetypes, and the people who unintentionally or intentionally embody them. Project Aurora's primary concern: the rise of lightcasters. Individuals whose public persona is built around themes of justice, empowerment, and empathy, but who, according to esoteric scripture, unknowingly channel forces of deception, division, or destruction. You can roll your eyes, or you can listen closely, because according to leaked fragments of the Aurora Index, published briefly on a dark web theological forum before being removed, Meghan's name appears under the code designation Aurora 07, the seventh entry. Tagged before her royal engagement, before any formal royal connection, the file reportedly contains a psychological profile assembled using media interviews, acting footage, and speeches, cross-reference timelines between Meghan's career milestones and major global disruptions, Brexit, Trump election, Hong Kong uprisings, ancestral lineage tracing her maternal bloodline back to early West African priesthoods and, curiously, to Iberian crypto-Judaic families exiled during the Inquisition. Spiritual assessments from informants embedded in Los Angeles wellness circles. And, perhaps most shockingly, 2 sealed witness reports from Catholic clergy who allegedly had spiritual interactions with Meghan between 2012 and 2016. That last part? It's what triggered internal panic. Because one of the reports references a phrase that has haunted theologians for generations. She carries the mirror of Sophia. It's an ancient term, one that appears in suppressed apocryphal texts dating back to the 2nd century AD. Sophia, meaning wisdom in Greek, is a recurring figure in mystical Christianity, Gnosticism, and Kabbalistic traditions. She's often depicted as divine wisdom, a spiritual force that exists before creation, one who brings enlightenment but also collapse. The mirror of Sophia refers to a person who reflects divine truth in such a powerful, unfiltered way that they cause chaos before they bring clarity. In other words, a spiritual disruptor. So when the file labeled Meghan Markle with that phrase, theologians panicked, not because they believed she was evil, but because they believed she was catalytic, someone who could, knowingly or unknowingly, shift world consciousness at a critical spiritual juncture. Sound far-fetched? Let's look at the evidence. In 2014, while Meghan was still acting on Suits, she gave an obscure keynote speech at a women's leadership summit in Toronto. It wasn't televised. It wasn't even widely reported. But a clip from that talk recently resurfaced, and it sent chills through anyone familiar with esoteric Christian prophecy. Because at one point, she said, "Sometimes, the crown we wear isn't made of gold. It's made of words, wounds, and wonder. And when we finally realize that the world bends. It's poetic, sure, but that phrasing? Almost word for word from a 16th century apocryphal sermon banned by the Council of Trent. Coincidence? Or subconscious invocation? Here's another one. A 2015 charity event in New York. Meghan, radiant in a simple black dress, greets guests, poses for photos. A Vatican cultural attaché named Father Giulio Morelli reportedly approaches her during the event. Witnesses say their exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. But afterward, Father Morelli immediately requested reassignment. He later told a confidant, whose interview was leaked via a Vatican journal, that he felt a piercing light behind her words, like being scanned by something ancient. Again, these are respected men of faith, not online fanatics, not bloggers, not ex-royal staff. So why is the Vatican paying attention? And more importantly, why try to suppress the file? Because it's not just about Meghan. It's about what she symbolizes. An American woman, of mixed heritage, rising from obscurity, crossing royal bloodlines, challenging centuries of tradition, using media, philanthropy, and activism to shape global discourse, inspiring millions and enraging millions more. Doesn't that sound familiar? To certain prophecy readers, it does. The Vatican, for all its flaws, is meticulous in decoding patterns. They don't jump to conclusions. They analyze. They wait. And when someone like Meghan begins to check every box of a long-whispered archetype, they react. So what happened when the Pope himself read the dossier? According to a former Monsignor turned whistleblower, who now lives under Vatican protection, Pope Leo XIV received the file in late 2020, just weeks after Meghan and Harry announced their Netflix deal. He was reportedly disturbed. Not angry, not dismissive. Disturbed. Why? Because according to the same source, Leo XIV made a chilling comment after reviewing the report. She is not the Antichrist, but she is a herald, a sign of the unraveling. This wasn't said lightly. Pope Leo XIV is known as a scholar of prophecy. He has published writings on the dangers of moral relativism masquerading as enlightenment. And to him, Meghan's global persona represented that very danger. The light that blinds. Which brings us back to the sermon. The crownless queen line wasn't a throwaway metaphor. It was a reference, a callback, a calculated trigger. The Vatican knew what it was doing. They were signaling, internally and externally, that the age of concealment was over. That Meghan's secret, her spiritual dossier, was now a global conversation. Which begs the question, how much does she know? Does Meghan know about Project Aurora? Does she know about the clergy who whispered her name in ancient prophecy? Or has she known all along? Because according to a producer from Suits, Meghan once joked during downtime on set, "If I ever wear a real crown, I'll probably bring down the monarchy." They laughed, but she didn't smile. And now? That joke doesn't seem so funny, especially with a Vatican file stamped confidential until divine clarification. So where do we go from here? The Vatican has sent its warning. The world has begun to listen. But someone else heard the Pope's sermon. Someone who's been missing for years. Someone who once knew Meghan during her Hollywood years. A man of faith. A priest. And when he disappeared without a trace, he left behind one thing. A key to a place no one expected. And what was locked behind that door would turn this spiritual mystery into a full-blown geopolitical crisis. He wasn't famous. He didn't write books. He didn't tour megachurches. He wasn't some flashy Vatican emissary with a political agenda. Father Jules DeMarco was quiet, private, just a humble priest who ran confessionals out of a tucked-away chapel off Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles. And yet, he may have been the most dangerous man to ever hear Meghan Markle speak freely. Why? Because according to multiple sources, including 2 former parishioners, 1 studio exec, and a confidential tipster inside the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, Father DeMarco was the last person to hear Meghan's true confession before her meteoric rise. And within a year of that moment, he disappeared. No goodbye, no transfer, no obituary, just gone. So what happened to Father Jules? And what exactly did Meghan say to him that made him run? Let's unpack it. Between 2013 and 2015, Father DeMarco was quietly known as the celebrity priest. Not because he advertised it, but because word spread that his sermons were discreet, his advice sharp, and his confessional manner healing. He was the kind of priest actors turned to when therapy felt too clinical and fame felt too corrupting. His tiny chapel, barely visible from the road, had no gold, no stained glass, no cathedral ceiling. Just a wooden cross, a candlelit aisle, and a series of soundproof booths used for old-school, anonymous confessionals. According to a retired actor who attended sessions there in 2014, he didn't judge, he listened. And sometimes, he'd pause like he knew more than he let on. Like he wasn't just hearing your sins, but decoding something bigger. And then in mid-2015, someone new walked through those doors. She wasn't a household name yet, but she carried herself like one. Meghan Markle. Still acting on Suits. Still flying between Toronto and LA. Still doing humanitarian work with United Nations women. Still building something. According to two separate sources who were in the chapel that week, Meghan was seen entering after hours through the side entrance. Alone. No driver. No assistant. No press. She stayed for over 90 minutes. When she left, she didn't speak. But Father DeMarco? He looked pale. Distracted. One of his parishioners asked if he was okay. His response: "Some truths don't cleanse. They haunt." He gave no further details. But within 6 months, he'd vanished. Official Vatican records show he was granted sabbatical leave. But there's no trace of where he went. No forwarding address. No return messages. No confirmation from the archdiocese. He simply disappeared. Now here's where it gets eerie. 3 years later, in 2018, shortly after Meghan's royal wedding, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Vatican. Inside, a single page of handwritten notes, believed to be Father DeMarco's. The ink was smudged, the handwriting erratic, but one line stood out. "She carries the silence of those who've seen the blueprint." And the mirror, it cracked. Vatican officials reportedly logged the page, sealed it under non-ordinary confessional material, and flagged it for review by the Doctrine Analysis Committee. Translation: they were terrified. Why? Because the reference to the mirror ties directly to the Church's oldest prophecy of the Sophia mirror, the same one mentioned in Meghan's Project Aurora dossier. This wasn't coincidence anymore. It was convergence. Multiple sources. Multiple angles. One theme. That Meghan didn't just confess something dark. She confirmed it. To a priest. Under oath. And that priest may have paid the price. But he didn't leave empty-handed. Because in 2020, a Vatican investigative unit known as Archivamas, tasked with evaluating spiritual anomalies, received a mysterious brass key. It came in a nondescript package. No return address. No fingerprints. Just a key. And a note. St. Edward's. Under the marble. She'll know. St. Edward's? That's the chapel located directly within Windsor Castle. The same chapel where Meghan and Harry were married. Coincidence? No chance. The Vatican sent a liaison to Windsor under the guise of a cultural diplomacy meeting. With quiet cooperation from a sympathetic senior royal, they were granted 30 minutes of supervised access to the chapel interior. What they found changed everything. Because beneath the marble tiles near the altar, hidden under centuries of dust, they discovered a lockbox. Unmarked. Rusted. Ancient. Inside, letters. Photographs. One envelope labeled simply M in ornate black ink. And tucked into the corner, a single page. Signed, J.D. Jules DeMarco. He had been there. He had hidden something, deliberately, beneath the very chapel where Meghan would later wed into royalty. Was it prophecy? Insurance? Confession? Whatever it was, the Church refused to release the contents. But one Vatican advisor slipped. In an interview with a religious journal later redacted, he said, "The papers confirmed that Meghan was not simply ascending into royalty. She was entering a symbolic arena, one she had prepared for long before anyone knew her name." Prepared? By whom? And for what? Some believe the file points to a spiritual apprenticeship, unofficial, undocumented, but guided by individuals who understood how to shape narrative, mystique, and power in alignment with ancient symbolism. In other words, a shadow education. And Father DeMarco may have been one of the few to see the entire picture. But he wasn't the only one. Because shortly after the Vatican unearthed that lockbox, a separate letter surfaced in New York. A letter Meghan had written to a J.D. in 2014, signed with a quote, Sometimes destiny finds us, but sometimes we build the staircase to reach it. What was she building? What staircase? And was DeMarco the only priest involved? Because reports from Toronto suggest Meghan may have visited a second spiritual counselor, one with deep ties to the Jesuit order. That counselor later died under suspicious circumstances, but not before allegedly sending an encrypted file, marked Veil Protocol, to a private server hosted in Switzerland. That server was tied to the same financial entity as Meghan and Harry's Archwell Foundation. Coincidence or coordination? Here's what we know. Father DeMarco tried to warn someone. He left behind a trail, small, scattered, encrypted, but every piece points to one thing: that Meghan's rise wasn't organic. It was orchestrated, not by handlers, not by PR firms, but by something older, something that understands the power of myth, of narrative, of modern-day queens crowned not with tiaras, but with symbolism. And when the Vatican finally pieced it together, the Pope didn't just issue a warning. He activated a crisis protocol, because what they found beneath St. Edward's Chapel was only the beginning. The next revelation would strike at the very heart of Meghan's public story. Her father, the man who was always slightly off-script, the one who claimed he knew things the palace didn't want him to say. Well, he wasn't lying. Because the next document the Vatican analyzed was a photograph, one that proved Thomas Markle had ties to Rome, long before Meghan ever set foot near a royal. And what that photo revealed shattered everything. What if the most explosive royal secret wasn't locked in a vault at Buckingham Palace, but beneath the very floor where Meghan Markle became a duchess? What if, while the world watched her walk down the aisle at St. George's Chapel, bathed in white, framed in history, serenaded by choirs, something much darker was buried just meters beneath her? Because that's what Vatican insiders now believe. That during preparations for the 2018 royal wedding, a historic anomaly was uncovered. And rather than notify church authorities or the British government, someone made a decision, a calculated one, to hide it, seal it again, and wait until the Vatican came looking. And what they found would set off alarms across 3 countries, trigger a classified Vatican analysis, and uncover a piece of Meghan Markle's past so secret it had been buried, literally, beneath stone, oath, and royal silence. So what was in the lockbox beneath St. Edward's Chapel? And why was Meghan's name on the envelope inside? Let's rewind. Most people don't know this, but St. Edward's Chapel, connected to Windsor Castle and just adjacent to the better-known St. George's Chapel, is one of the oldest religious sites tied to royal rites. It's rarely used for public events. Small, austere, almost forgotten. But its foundations go back centuries. Some say it was once a crypt. Others say it was part of an ancient observatory built by a secret brotherhood of monks who practiced celestial rites alongside royal rituals. And that's where this gets strange. Because during wedding week, in May 2018, a contractor from a historical preservation company, tasked with structural integrity checks before Meghan's arrival, noticed something unusual. A hollow echo beneath a panel of ancient marble. Now, normally, that would trigger a routine report. Except this time, it didn't. According to a leaked memo sent to the Royal Household Facilities Office, one supervisor allegedly instructed the team to leave the panel untouched. Do not photograph. Refer concerns to Code Protocol St. Mary's Silence. Let's pause there. St. Mary's Silence is an internal code phrase used within royal archives to designate objects or documents believed to contain controversial religious or spiritual significance, specifically ones that could contradict or undermine institutional narratives. It's rarely used, maybe 4 or 5 times in the last 100 years. But on that day, it was invoked, and the restoration team? Silenced. Their report was never filed. But one whistleblower, only known by the initials JD, no relation to Father Jules DeMarco, later reached out to a Vatican cultural historian with a single message. There's something beneath Edward's floor. A box. It has her name on it. This goes beyond the monarchy. This is ecclesiastical. That message was intercepted by Vatican intelligence specialists operating under Archive MS, the same team that had been monitoring Meghan's rise through Project Aurora. Within 2 months, a diplomatic request was made. Quiet. Formal. Coded in cultural terms. The Pope was requesting archaeological access to St. Edward's Chapel as part of an interfaith heritage initiative. The palace initially refused, but behind closed doors, something changed. A senior royal, rumored to be Prince William himself, allegedly gave conditional approval. 30 minutes. One Vatican envoy. No press. No photographs. The inspection occurred at dawn. No bells. No witnesses. Just a single envoy, Cardinal Paolo Sorelli, escorted by 2 royal archivists and a chapel custodian. They lifted the marble panel, and beneath it, a rusted iron lockbox, wrapped in what appeared to be cloth woven with Latin script. And not just any script. Words pulled from the forbidden Gospel of Mary Magdalene, a Gnostic text long denounced by the Church for its implications about feminine divine power. Inside the box, for items, a sealed envelope marked with a single initial, M. A black-and-white photograph of a man standing at the gates of the Apostolic Nunciature in Washington, D.C., the Vatican's embassy in the U.S. A pressed rose, long dead but perfectly preserved. A folded letter, and signed, but ending with the words, "Let her rise, but let her not remember." That line, it shook the cardinal, because it mirrors an ancient liturgical phrase whispered during certain rites of spiritual containment, used when individuals believed to hold dormant gifts or prophetic burdens are meant to rise into public life without recalling their deeper connection to divine roles. Translation: someone wanted Meghan to fulfill a role, but not to know she was fulfilling it. Someone wanted her to ascend, but remain blind to the architecture beneath her rise. It's the ultimate contradiction. Empowerment without awareness, visibility without understanding, and influence without control. And the man in the photo was Thomas Markle, outside the Vatican's American headquarters, circa 1978. So what was he doing there? And why is his image, not Meghan's, the one buried in a chapel tied to royal rites and esoteric rituals? We'll get to that, but let's focus on the envelope, because inside that envelope marked M was a note. Only 2 sentences. She is the hinge between 2 ages. Protect her until the veil thins. The handwriting matched a style common among early 20th century Benedictine mystics. But the date? Long after such practices were publicly disbanded, which means someone, within the last decade, had not only revived forbidden spiritual language, they had sealed it in the floor of a royal chapel. And somehow, it was tied to Meghan. So here's the million-dollar question. Did Meghan know? Had she ever seen the lockbox? Had someone told her? Hinted? Well, here's where it gets spine-chilling. 2 months before her wedding, Meghan visited St. George's Chapel for a private prayer moment. Press coverage said it was quiet reflection, but a chapel staffer later confided to a friend that Meghan went silent for over 20 minutes standing near the Edward panel. She wasn't praying. She was listening. Her words, when she finally spoke, "I feel old here. Like I've done this before." The staffer thought it was poetic. Until now. Until the Vatican revealed the contents of the box. And that's when a pattern emerged. Because that phrase, "I've done this before," has appeared multiple times in interviews, journal entries, and recorded conversations involving Meghan. As far back as college. As far back as childhood. A sense of premonition. A sense of legacy. A belief, perhaps, that her story was already written. But not by her. And that, according to Vatican analysis, is the core concern. Because when someone rises with such speed, such symbolic power, and such emotional pull across cultures, countries, and communities, and they believe it was destiny, the question becomes, whose destiny? Theirs, or someone else's? Because remember, the Vatican doesn't fear individuals. It fears instruments, conduits, archetypes reborn. And now, with the lockbox in their possession and the contents under spiritual classification, the Church faces a new dilemma. What if Meghan's rise wasn't about royalty, but ritual? Not about love, but legacy? And what if the veil is thinning? Because the letter warned of it. And if the veil falls, so do the secrets. Starting with the man in the photograph. Thomas Markle. The man who never quite fit the narrative. The man whose public gaffes seemed almost distracting. But behind the scenes, he may have held the first key to this entire mystery. And what he knew, what he said in a now-deleted interview, matches the Vatican's greatest fear, because he hinted at something no one took seriously, something even Meghan may not believe herself. that her father was never just a lighting director. He was a messenger, a liaison, and his relationship with the Vatican goes back further than anyone imagined. But what came next would shatter every story we've ever been told about Meghan's origins. He was supposed to be the comic relief, the bumbling, misunderstood father, the guy who posed for staged paparazzi photos, gave awkward tabloid interviews, and fumbled his way through the global spotlight as his daughter married into the most scrutinized family on earth. But what if we got it all wrong? What if Thomas Markle's story wasn't just tragic or embarrassing, but deliberately misrepresented? What if, behind the public clumsiness, was a man sitting on one of the most consequential secrets of the modern royal era? Because now, thanks to recovered Vatican documents, anonymous whistleblowers, and a photograph buried beneath a royal chapel, the world is starting to ask, who really is Thomas Markle? And why does his name appear in internal Vatican communication logs as early as 1978? Let's start with the photo. Recovered from the lockbox beneath St. Edward's Chapel. Yes, that lockbox was a grainy black and white image of Thomas Markle standing outside the Apostolic Nunciature in Washington, D.C., the Vatican's diplomatic headquarters in the United States. The photo wasn't dated, but clothing experts estimate it was taken in the late 70s. Thomas would have been in his early 30s. Not yet famous, not yet Emmy-winning, still years away from marrying Doria Ragland. So why was he there? And why did someone place that photo, of all possible keepsakes, beneath a royal chapel floor in a box labeled M? Some say it's a coincidence. Maybe he was doing lighting for a nearby TV gig. Maybe he stumbled across it. But Vatican records, leaked by a former clerical assistant in 2021, paint a different picture. A 1979 internal memo from Cardinal Rinaldi to the Vatican Secretary of State includes the following line. Markleus, sick, has completed preliminary sessions. Awaiting Directive Re, Guardian Protocol. American Consulate aware. Yes, they misspelled Markle. But Vatican translations often mangle American names. What stands out? Guardian Protocol. That term, according to religious scholars, is not standard Vatican diplomatic language. It refers to an informal classification used in obscure theological texts to designate civilians entrusted with knowledge or stewardship of spiritual vessels or lineage bearers. Translation: Thomas may have been identified as a guardian, someone meant to protect or guide a person of prophetic importance, not through violence, not through control, but through quiet shielding, through positioning. It sounds insane, but connect the dots. In the early 1980s, Thomas Markle begins climbing the Hollywood studio ladder. He wins an Emmy for lighting design. He builds relationships with producers, directors, casting agents. He quietly amasses influence behind the scenes. Not fame, positioning. By the mid-90s, he's raising Meghan in Hollywood-adjacent neighborhoods, enrolling her in private Catholic schools, exposing her to film sets, backstage tours, and media dynamics. And though their relationship becomes strained over time, one pattern holds. He always encouraged visibility, always nudged her toward platforms, speeches, pageants, activism, not in a stage parent way, but with purpose. One former colleague at Married with Children recalled Thomas saying, "She's got that thing. She won't just be in the room, she'll change the temperature of the room." And here's where it gets chilling. In a now-deleted 2018 interview with a German tabloid, Thomas allegedly said, "I've always known Meghan was meant for more. Not just the cameras. Something older. She's not like the others. Sometimes I feel like I was just the delivery guy." Just the delivery guy? Think about that. And now match it with the Vatican note found in the lockbox. Let her rise, but let her not remember. Was Thomas part of that plan? Was he tasked, knowingly or not, with guiding a vessel? It sounds like science fiction, but the Vatican treats it like spiritual warfare. Because in 1987, another memo surfaces from a Jesuit outpost in Southern California. It reads, Markle contact verified. Minor vessel confirmed. Unawakened. Recommend continued observation. Maternal bloodline uncorrupted. Awaiting auroral sign. Auroral sign. Project Aurora. The same Vatican operation that flagged Meghan in 2013. Are you connecting the timeline? Because it looks like the Vatican had eyes on Meghan from birth. And Thomas was their original point of contact. But something changed in the 2000s. Records go dark. No further memos. No updates. No trace of Project Aurora references. Until 2013, the year Meghan gave her now infamous crown speech in Toronto, the same speech the Vatican later flagged for its suspicious alignment with Gnostic phrasing. That's when a new note appears. Different author, different tone, more urgent. Subject has entered phase of self-initiation. Public resonance increasing. Guardian Markle no longer active participant. Monitor proximity candidates. Self-initiation. That implies Meghan began willingly stepping into her symbolic role, with or without knowledge of what it truly meant. And proximity candidates. A Vatican term for potential partners, allies, or spouses who might influence or anchor a vessel's energy. Which brings us to Prince Harry, the ultimate proximity candidate. But before we get to him, because trust me, that's a storm, we need to understand how Thomas's role ended. Because here's where it all goes sideways. In 2016, right as Meghan and Harry's relationship becomes public, Thomas begins acting erratically. He gives interviews. He fakes paparazzi photos. He exposes private letters. He disrupts the fairy tale narrative. But what if that was intentional? What if, as one Vatican scholar proposed, Thomas was trying to break the ritual, disrupt the storyline, pull the emergency brake before the marriage sealed an ancient pattern? In a private message leaked by someone close to the Markle family, Thomas allegedly told a cousin, "They think I'm a fool. They have no idea. I tried to warn her. I tried. But she's gone too far in." Too far into what? The crown? The fame? Or something far older? Something scripted before birth? Because the Vatican believes Thomas was no longer just a bystander. He was a failed guardian, one who tried to rebel against a rising force, and failed. Which might explain why the Vatican started looking elsewhere. Why they started monitoring spiritual advisors in Hollywood, Jesuit professors in Canada, and eventually, priests like Jules DeMarco. Because once a vessel awakens, and the guardian loses control, the church gets nervous. Very nervous. Because that's when prophecy becomes uncontained, and the spiritual stakes skyrocket. And Thomas may have known all along. In his final public interview before going silent in 2020, he said this: "Meghan was always different. People say that about their kids, but I mean it. It's like she knew things before they happened. I don't understand it. I don't need to. But I hope someone's watching over her." That wasn't a father speaking casually. That was a man with knowledge. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, but definitely certainty. And now he's silent, withdrawn, cut off, missing from the narrative. Not by accident, because his part of the story is over, and hers is still unfolding. But here's where it gets wild. Because Meghan's side of the story, the part she tried to control, to shape, to brand, was almost shattered by a single relic. A diary entry, one that disappeared for years, one that mentions the Vatican, the mirror, and a black envelope she was told to burn. She didn't. She hid it, and someone found it. And that person is about to reveal what Meghan never thought would see the light of day. What would you write in a diary if you believed no one would ever read it? If your thoughts were safe? If your secrets could breathe? Now imagine this. What if someone found that diary? And what if that someone realized you were hiding more than just teenage heartbreak or fame-driven insecurities? What if they discovered a prophecy, a coded confession? Or worse, an admission that you didn't fully understand who you were becoming? Because according to a former Hollywood producer, who once called Meghan Markle the most unknowable woman in the room, there was a diary. One that surfaced briefly. One that nearly caused a meltdown inside the Archwell legal team. And one entry, in particular, shook everyone who read it. Let's rewind. In the mid-2000s, before Suits, before Harry, before the glare of royal scrutiny, Meghan reportedly kept journals. Handwritten, personal, locked in a leather-bound notebook she carried while traveling between Toronto and Los Angeles. According to two former friends, it wasn't just a diary, it was a ritual. She'd write under candlelight, burn sage, and sometimes leave pages unfinished, as if waiting for a message to return. Sounds strange? It gets stranger. One of those friends, a wardrobe assistant on Fringe, claimed Meghan once said, "When I write at night, it doesn't feel like me writing. It feels like memory." Now that's a bold statement. One most would dismiss as poetic flair. Until you read the missing entry. An entry she later tried to erase. But let's talk about how it was found first. In 2019, a former Hollywood producer, who worked briefly with Meghan during her Deal or No Deal days, was cleaning out a storage unit. He found an unmarked box labeled 2011 to 2013. Inside, old casting headshots, scribbled notes from acting classes, and a half-burned diary. Only a few pages were legible. The rest had water damage, smoke curling across the edges. Some parts looked ripped out, but one entry, dated October 17, 2012, remained intact. And its contents would send Vatican analysts, spiritual scholars, and crisis managers into a quiet frenzy. Let me read you part of it. Tonight I dreamed of marble halls. Candles everywhere. A voice said, "You've seen this room before." I stood before a mirror, but my reflection wore a crown of flame. I wasn't afraid. I was ancient. A letter arrived. Black envelope. No return address. Just a symbol. The eye inside the veil. I haven't opened it yet. It smells like ash. Why do I feel like something is watching me every time I pray? Let that sink in. Let it simmer. Because it reads less like a diary and more like a journal entry from someone experiencing a spiritual awakening, or a breakdown, or a ritual. Now you might say, dreams are just dreams. Sure, but in religious mysticism, dreamscapes, especially those recurring with vivid symbols, are often interpreted as messages, visitations, or premonitions. The mirror symbol? We've heard it before. In Vatican prophecies. In Father DeMarco's notes. In the leaked Project Aurora documentation where Meghan is dubbed the Mirror of Sophia. The Crown of Flame? An ancient depiction